The phone in your hand, the car you drove today, every AI server powering every search result you've ever seen. All of them depend on one company, on one island, 80 miles from a hostile superpower that wants it back. Over 90% of the world's most advanced chips are manufactured in a single location, an earthquake-prone island smaller than Switzerland. A full-scale conflict here would cost an estimated $10 trillion, 10% of global GDP. That's COVID, the Ukraine war, and the 2008 financial crisis, combined. How did one company on a tiny island become the most critical and most dangerous monopoly in world history? This isn't just about gadgets, this is about a trillion-dollar curse, and the fuse is already lit. Now, you might think the worst-case scenario is a full invasion. But here's what most people haven't considered. Even a blockade, no shots fired, no invasion, would shrink the global economy by 2.8% in year one. $2.7 trillion gone, just like that. The US alone takes a $1.6 trillion hit, 8% of its economy. Worse than the 2008 crash. China's own economy contracts by 7%, Taiwan's by a devastating 40%. And these aren't my numbers. This is Bloomberg Economics, the Institute for Economics and Peace, and the Hudson Institute, all converging on the same conclusion. Now make it personal. Skyrocketing electronics prices, mass layoffs across tech and auto, your investment portfolio gutted. China's semiconductor imports already exceed its oil imports in value. Chips are the new oil, and one island controls the spigot. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning, to a war refugee with a radical idea that everyone thought was doomed to fail. You've probably heard of TSMC, the company that makes everyone's chips. But what most people don't realize is how unlikely this empire was, and how one man's rejection by American corporations created it. It starts with a resource crisis. In 1973, when the OPEC oil embargo crashed Taiwan's economy, Premier Chiang Ching-kuo gave his advisors a desperate order. Come up with a critical technology initiative. The bigger the better. The last resource crisis created this resource crisis. Morris Chang was born July 10, 1931, in Ningbo, China. By 18, his family had fled across 6 Chinese cities during the Sino-Japanese War and Civil War. 10 different schools. He emigrated to the US in 1949, Harvard, MIT, bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, Stanford, PhD in electrical engineering. Then 25 years at Texas Instruments, rising to senior vice president, one of the most powerful executives in the American semiconductor industry. And then he was sidelined, transferred to a struggling consumer division, possibly passed over due to racial bias. He resigned at 52. Taiwan's legendary economic technocrat, K.T. Lee, recruited him to lead ITRI, Taiwan's Industrial Technology Research Institute. Chang was about to change the world. Before TSMC, the semiconductor industry ran on a simple model. Intel, Texas Instruments, Motorola, they designed and manufactured their own chips. Integrated device manufacturers. One company does everything. Chang's radical insight: create a company that exclusively manufactures chips designed by others, a pure-play foundry. With an ironclad promise, we will never compete with our customers. The reaction was dismissive. Chang recalled, "People just dismissed it. What the hell is Taiwan doing? What the hell is Morris Chang doing?" TSMC was founded February 21, 1987. Taiwan's government put up 48.3% of the startup capital. Chang tried to get Intel, TI, and Motorola to invest. All declined. Only the Dutch giant Philips said yes, $58 million for a 27.5% stake. The foundry model's genius was this: it dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for chip designers. You didn't need billions for a factory anymore, just a design. An entire ecosystem of fabless companies sprouted. NVIDIA in 1993, Qualcomm, Broadcom, MediaTek. AMD spun off its fabs in 2009. Apple could design its own chips without owning a single factory. Revenue grew at 49% per year in TSMC's first decade. The model worked too well. Soon the entire world was outsourcing its brainpower to one island. But what the pioneers of globalization didn't anticipate was the geopolitical time bomb they were creating. The world celebrated cheap, powerful chips. Nobody noticed they'd created a single point of failure for the entire global economy. And the man who built this empire? Morris Chang himself called the multi-billion-dollar efforts to replicate his factories an expensive, wasteful exercise in futility. The numbers prove his point. A single wafer costs $6,681 in Taiwan. The same wafer in Arizona? $16,123. 2.4 times more. Do the math. Profit margin in Arizona, 8%. In Taiwan, 62%. Why would the architect be so skeptical? Because building a fab is not the hard part. The hard part is everything else. Hey, quick question for the comments. If you were running a country right now, would you spend $165 billion trying to copy TSMC? Or would you just make nice with Taiwan and hope for the best? Let me know below. TSMC's grip isn't loosening, it's tightening. 71% of the global foundry market by revenue. Over 90% of cutting-edge logic chips below 7 nanometers. Revenue from advanced technologies, 77% of total wafer revenue in Q4 2025. 2025 revenue, $122.4 billion. Net income, roughly $55 billion. Market cap, $1.8 trillion, the world's sixth most valuable company. And for 2026, TSMC plans to spend $52 to $56 billion in capital expenditure. That's more than Intel's entire annual revenue. Samsung Foundry, the nearest competitor, 6.8% market share. Intel Foundry posted a $13 billion operating loss in 2024 alone. And here's what should terrify anyone betting on diversification. The AI boom hasn't weakened TSMC's grip. It's strengthened it. High-performance computing and AI constituted 58% of TSMC's revenue in 2025, up from near zero a decade ago. The world isn't becoming less dependent on TSMC, it's becoming more. So how did a Taiwanese startup become the most critical company on Earth? 5 turning points. 1. Intel's validation. In the late 1980s, Andy Grove placed an early order with TSMC. That order forced world-class quality standards. Intel's stamp of approval told the industry, this foundry is real. 2. The ASML partnership. TSMC and ASML were both Philips-affiliated startups. Chang later said, TSMC and ASML were established almost at the same period, and we grew up together. TSMC was the first to commercialize extreme ultraviolet lithography at scale. That partnership would become the most important in the history of technology. 3. Winning Apple. This one changed everything. Samsung was manufacturing Apple's chips, but Samsung was also Apple's biggest competitor in smartphones. Foxconn founder Terry Gou arranged a meeting between Apple COO Jeff Williams and Morris Chang on November 9, 2010. Intel's CEO Paul Otellini was offered the contract first. He declined. The margins were too thin. Tim Cook told Chang, "Don't worry, Intel is not good at doing dedicated foundry service." The A8 chip for the iPhone 6 in fall 2014 was was the first Apple TSMC chip. By the iPhone 7, TSMC had exclusive production. Share price ballooned 600%. 4. Surpassing Intel. Intel got stuck on 14 nanometers for years. TSMC was mass-producing 7 nanometer by 2018, 5 nanometer by 2020. Apple's M1 chip, built on TSMC 5 nanometer, abandoned Intel entirely. In 2021, Intel's own CEO acknowledged outsourcing to TSMC. The student had become the master. 5. The Jensen-Huang connection. When TSMC's San Jose office neglected NVIDIA, Jensen-Huang personally wrote to Morris Chang. By 1998, NVIDIA was a top 5 customer. In 2013, Chang considered Huang as a candidate to succeed him as TSMC CEO. Huang's response: "I already have a job." By the way, when Chang offered him that job, NVIDIA was worth $9 billion. Today, over $3 trillion. That might be the most expensive "I already have a job" in human history. Now let me explain why nobody can catch up. And this is where the story gets genuinely insane. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to engrave the entire contents of Wikipedia onto a grain of rice, using a beam of light bounced off 11 mirrors in a perfect vacuum, and doing it 50,000 times per second with 0 errors. That's essentially what EUV lithography does. ASML, based in the Netherlands, controls 100% of the EUV lithography market. Each machine contains over 700,000 components from roughly 1,200 suppliers. Cost: $150 to $220 million per machine. The next generation high-NA EUV, $350 to $400 million. Only 5 have shipped by mid-2025. The physics: tin droplets traveling at 200 miles per hour are struck by a 30-kilowatt laser twice, 50,000 times per second. This creates 3 million microscopic suns per minute at 40 times the temperature of the sun's surface. The light bounces through 11 mirrors in a vacuum to project circuit patterns onto silicon. This is why there are only about 200 of these machines on the entire planet, and one company in the Netherlands controls every single one. TSMC controls roughly 56% of global installed EUV capacity. ASML's machines are banned from sale to China. But even if you had the machines, you'd still lose. Yield, the percentage of functional chips per wafer, is what separates TSMC from everyone else. TSMC, roughly 90% at mature 3 nanometer. Samsung, about 50% after 3 years. Samsung's initial 3 nanometer yields, reportedly 10 to 20%. Intel's 18A, around 10% early on. Even identical equipment produces different results. Why? Tacit process knowledge. Thousands of accumulated optimizations that cannot be documented. A modern semiconductor process involves over 1,000 individual steps. ASML's CEO has said a competitor faces a 10 to 15-year gap in replicating EUV technology alone. Hsinchu Science Park houses hundreds of specialized suppliers within hours' drive. Design, foundry, packaging, testing, all within kilometers. A problem can be solved in hours because the expert is next door. US fabs cost roughly twice as much to build and take nearly double the construction time. 38 months versus 19 months in Taiwan. The CHIPS Act, $52.7 billion. The EU CHIPS Act, €43 billion. Massive numbers, but China invests the equivalent of the US CHIPS Act virtually every year. Big Fund Phase 3 alone, $47.5 billion. And only 24 of 161 CHIPS Act milestones have been completed as of July 2025. TSMC CEO C.C. Wei said it plainly. Silicon from TSMC is the bottleneck. The West is spending hundreds of billions to escape the Taiwan trap. But what if the trap isn't just economic? What if it's military? The silicon shield, the theory that Taiwan's chip monopoly deters invasion because attacking would devastate every economy on Earth, including China's own. That theory might be a fatal miscalculation. Some US strategists argue Taiwan should threaten to destroy its own fabs if invaded. They call it the broken nest theory. Elbridge Colby, the current Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, has said outright, "Disabling or destroying TSMC is table stakes." Congressman Seth Moulton has suggested bombing the facilities. And here's what makes the threat credible. Both TSMC and ASML have confirmed the ability to remotely disable their most advanced machines. There is literally a kill switch. But TSMC's own chairman has a different view. Mark Liu. Nobody can control TSMC by force. Even captured intact, the fabs would be useless. They depend on real-time connections with suppliers in Europe, Japan, and the US. This is the heart of the curse. Taiwan's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability. And China is calculating its odds. Back in 2000, a journalist named Craig Addison coined the term silicon shield. The logic was simple. Taiwan's irreplaceable role in chips creates an economic deterrent. Any attack triggers catastrophic disruption to every economy, including China's. Semiconductor age mutually assured destruction. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen called the semiconductor industry the divine mountain that protects the nation. But the shield has critical flaws. Matthew Pottinger, former Deputy National Security Advisor, argues that China's leadership may not follow Western rational economic calculus. For Beijing, reunification may carry ideological value that overrides any economic cost. Here's where it gets really perverse. Every fab TSMC builds overseas chips away at the monopoly that makes Taiwan worth protecting. The allies begging for protection are the ones slowly killing the shield. TSMC chairman Mark Liu captured the absurdity perfectly. China will not invade Taiwan because of semiconductors. China will not invade Taiwan because of semiconductors. The chips are irrelevant to China's decision calculus. Let that sink in. The shield may be an illusion. Taiwan's defense minister, Chiu Kuo-cheng, has said Taiwan would not tolerate any US attempts to destroy TSMC. Think about that. The country you're supposed to be protecting is telling you not to destroy their most valuable asset. If the shield is an illusion, here's what's on the other side. The PLA Navy is now the world's largest by hull count. Over 370 ships, reaching 435 by 2030. The US Navy, roughly 296. China's shipbuilding capacity exceeds the United States by 232 times in tonnage. New capability, the Type 076 Sichuan, the world's first amphibious assault ship with an electromagnetic catapult. Launched December 2024. The 2027 deadline. Xi Jinping has directed PLA readiness for a Taiwan operation by 2027, coinciding with the PLA's 100th anniversary. The Pentagon's 2025 report states, China expects to be able to fight and win a war on Taiwan by the end of 2027. Admiral Samuel Paparo, Indo-Pacific commander, said in May 2025 that the PLA has escalated military pressure by 300%. He called it a rapid boil. PLA incursions into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, 3056, from January to October 2025, up 33% year over year. These aren't drills anymore, they're rehearsals. Before Nancy Pelosi's 2022 visit, only 23 total median line crossings had ever been recorded. After her visit, 563 in the remaining months of 2022 alone. These incursions are now essentially daily, and the exercises are increasingly unannounced, blurring the line between rehearsal and actual attack. So what does a conflict actually look like? There are 4 levels of escalation, and each one is worse than the last. First, subversion. Engineered unrest. A puppet government installed from within. Moderate economic disruption. Targeted, surgical. Second, quarantine. Grey zone tactics, customs checks, law enforcement harassment of shipping. $565 billion in Taiwanese trade at risk. Not technically an act of war, but devastating. Third, blockade. A full halt on all imports and exports. An act of war. The global cost, $2.7 trillion. GDP contraction of 2.8% worldwide. Fourth, full invasion. Amphibious and aerial assault. $10 trillion wiped out. Asia's GDP contracts by roughly 25%. The German Marshall Fund projects a failed invasion would cost the PLA 100,000 casualties. Taiwan, 50,000 military, 50,000 civilian. CSIS wargamed nearly 24 iterations in January 2023. With US and Japan involvement, Taiwan defeated a conventional invasion in most scenarios, but at enormous cost. The US expended over 5,000 long-range missiles in just 3 weeks. The invasion would dwarf D-Day. China would need to transport over 1 million troops across the strait versus 200,000 at Normandy. And Taiwan has only 14 viable beach landing sites, all heavily fortified. As Professor Phillips O'Brien of St. Andrews put it, the thought about China invading Taiwan, that's a massacre for the Chinese Navy. CIA Director William Burns has said China may harbor doubts about whether it has the capability, but a blockade is a different story. CSIS's Lights Out report from July 2025 ran 26 wargame iterations. Blockades are not low cost for China, but they're devastating for Taiwan. If China attacks Taiwan's electrical grid, as Russia did in Ukraine, electricity drops to 20% of pre-blockade levels. All manufacturing halts. Taiwan imports 97% of its total energy supply. TSMC alone consumed 8.9% of all Taiwanese electricity in 2024, projected to reach 25% by 2030. After 3 months of blockade, fab operations halt regardless. Expired chemicals, cut off supply lines. The factories go dark. So just move the factories, right? TSMC Arizona, $165 billion total investment for 6 fabs, the largest greenfield foreign direct investment in US history. Fab 1, 4 nanometer, entered volume production in Q4 2024, roughly 1 year late. Yields reportedly comparable to Taiwan, but the chips must be sent back to Taiwan for advanced packaging. Cultural clashes, a class action lawsuit with over 30 plaintiffs alleging anti-American bias and Mandarin-only meetings. TSMC's Glassdoor approval rating, 27%. Intel's, 85%. And even if you solved all of that, even if you build the fabs, you can't build the ecosystem. It took Taiwan 40 years. The US is at year 3. Even capturing the fabs wouldn't work. The US cuts off EDA software. ASML refuses maintenance. Japan halts chemical shipments. The 83,825 highly trained engineers flee. These fabs aren't standalone assets. They're nodes in a global network. So if the shield is cracking and building a new one takes decades, what is the endgame? What happens when the world's most powerful army comes for the world's most critical company? The fate of the global economy rests on a handful of people and a few square miles of land. The broken nest scenario: if the PLA invades, the kill switch gets triggered. ASML's machines are bricked remotely. EUV lithography, costing $150 to $400 million per machine, rendered useless. The US cuts off EDA software. Japanese chemical suppliers halt shipments. The 83,825 engineers flee. TSMC's fabs are not self-contained. Even captured intact, they're worthless within weeks. This answers the question from the beginning. The curse is that Taiwan's value is what makes it a target, and the only way to neutralize the threat might be to destroy the value itself. Chi-Yuan Liu, president of Macronics International, put it perfectly. If you have valuable jade in your pocket and you can't defend yourself, many robbers will target you. In the fight over who gets it, the jade gets broken. The immediate aftermath. Global markets crash. 1.05 trillion chips per year stop flowing. 169 industries halt. The automotive sector, already scarred by the 2020 shortage that cost $200 billion and cut 19.6 million vehicles from production, faces total shutdown. AI development freezes. The Pentagon discovers that roughly 90% of chips used across Department of Defense systems were sourced overseas. According to defense analysts, much of it from the island they just helped destroy. And here's the irony of ironies. Warren Buffett saw it coming. He bought $4.1 billion of TSMC shares in Q3 2022, then sold 86% by Q4 2022. He called TSMC a fantastic enterprise with nobody in their league, but said Taiwan's location leaves crucial factors out of its control. His words, "I feel better about the capital we've got deployed in Japan than in Taiwan." The irony? Berkshire Hathaway maintained over 40% of its assets in Apple, which depends entirely on TSMC. The Oracle of Omaha couldn't escape the trap either. The nest is broken. The chips stop flowing. But here's what nobody's talking about. The real curse isn't the war. It's what's already happening inside Taiwan right now. 3 possible futures. Scenario A, the tense standoff. The most likely outcome, call it 60 to 70% odds. The world walks the tightrope. Massive investment in diversification, $52.7 billion CHIPS Act, €43 billion EU CHIPS Act, $7.8 billion in Japanese subsidies, $10 billion India semiconductor mission, slowly chipping away at Taiwan's monopoly over a decade. But TSMC keeps its most advanced R&D in Taiwan, and the AI boom is actually strengthening TSMC's grip, not weakening it. As analyst Ben Thompson wrote in January 2026, the real risk isn't China destroying TSMC, it's that TSMC's monopoly is actually holding back the entire AI industry. Scenario B, conflict and global depression, maybe 10 to 20% odds. China invades or blockades. The fabs are destroyed or neutralized. The world enters a prolonged economic crisis that dwarfs anything in living memory. $10 trillion wiped out. A technological dark age until new capacity, requiring at least $1 trillion in investment and a 35 to 65% increase in chip prices, comes online years later. Scenario C, the slow erosion. 20 to 30% odds, and the most insidious outcome. TSMC builds fabs abroad to satisfy political demands, but in doing so erodes the very concentration that constitutes the shield. The demands of allies gradually render Taiwan replaceable. When the shield is gone, so is the deterrent. But here's what none of those scenarios capture: the curse that's already eating Taiwan from the inside. The harsh reality is, Taiwan's technology success mirrors the Dutch disease of oil-rich nations. Housing prices near TSMC fabs have surged 89 to 121% since 2020. Taipei's house price-to-income ratio hit 15.71, among the highest in the world. Fertility rate, 0.9 children per woman. The average monthly salary outside TSMC, roughly $1,250. The Taiwan dollar is undervalued by 55% against the US dollar, the steepest currency misalignment in the world. The average worker is effectively underwriting the country's export success through lower pay and eroded purchasing power. The semiconductor industry generates $165 billion in revenue, 20.7% of Taiwan's entire GDP. Taiwan's population is projected to shrink by 3 million by 2045. The chips that protect the island from external threats are slowly hollowing it out from within. Is TSMC Taiwan's greatest asset or its most dangerous liability? And can those two things even be separated? The next time you pick up your phone, remember the tiny island and the trillion-dollar curse that makes it all possible. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into China's property collapse, the $60 trillion trap that's dragging down the world's second-largest economy, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Which scenario do you think we're headed for? The tense standoff, the conflict, or the slow erosion? Drop your prediction in the comments.